Well, hello, good day. This is Teresa Beam with Reasoning Together, and this is not Adventist Talk. That's a different series we're doing, and it's going to really start gearing back up in April. And we've got some really good episodes coming up in April. But the one I'm looking the most forward to is an episode we're doing called Discovering the Sabbath After Adventism. And we're going to be here with two heavyweights on the subject, Miles from Answering Adventism and Else Thunder Lordston. And that's going to be great. And that'll be towards the middle of it. And then we're also going to have another man named, he's a Catholic apologist, Brian Mercier. And he's going to be talking about the things that he wished Adventists knew about Catholicism, things that the Adventists get wrong. So anyway, and he's got his own YouTube channel, Answers Catholic Truth. That's what it is. Okay. So today we're going to talk about something that's very, very unpleasant. But I think it needs to be talked about. I think we need to be brave and talk about things. And here is the thing about this subject. I have done a lot of talking to people. I love to talk to people. I love to hear their opinions. And the topic is going to be, why do people cover up sexual abuse in their children, in their families, in their schools? In their churches? Why do people? So growing up, I encountered a lot of young people that told me I've always been very motherly. And so I've always had people kind of confide in me, which I enjoyed. But I had a lot of people confide in me that they had been sexually abused by someone in their family or at their church or in their neighborhood or, by a family member. And, when I became Catholic, when we were studying into Catholicism, was right during the priest sexual scandal. And the greatest part of the scandal was that the bishops covered it up. At least some of them did. And, why do people cover up such unbelievably bad situations like that? Why don't they go out and get the bad guy? Here's their chance. They got there's undeniable bad guy here. There's and everybody wants to be the hero. And yet in this situation, nobody wants to be the hero and save these little kids. Everybody runs like cowards. And I just don't understand it. And I wanted to understand. I wanted to truly understand it. So I started to ask people, and of course, no one's going to answer you. Nobody's going to. So why did you cover up? Nobody answers that. But I will tell you, I talked to policemen. I talked to lots of mothers and fathers, principals, teachers, pastors about this. What's just this question? Why would anybody cover that up? Now, a lot of them did answer, but not personally, and I wasn't trying to accuse them of covering up. But I mean, of course, that's what everybody says. Well, I personally didn't cover anything up. But anyway, they give me a good answer as to why, or not a good answer, but they attempted to answer my question. And so one of the main things that I did here when I heard about it, the first big wave of me just getting furious over this was I had gone to a Seventh-day Adventist boarding academy, and I'd heard all these horror stories by several of the girls there. Enough of the girls, I thought that it needed to be brought up to a high-level Adventist leader, and I spoke to an Adventist televangelist. It was not Doug Batchelor, by the way. Do not guess him. It was not him. And I have no reason to protect him. I just know that that's where everybody's going to go. It was not Doug Batchelor. But anyway, so I called him up and I spoke to him personally. And I said, this is happening. And this is what he replied. He said, well, those girls need to forgive the men that did this. And he said, blame isn't going to help anybody. And then there were people that told me, oh, they just made it up. That was a very common, kids just want attention. And later on, we'll explain where that came from. So when I was going to join the Catholic Church, I felt like this was the time to really find out. Everybody's covering it up, not just Catholics. Why? So what the policeman said. The policeman that I spoke to said it's very, very difficult to prove. You can't go around accusing people without evidence. And evidence in sexual abuse is extremely difficult to procure. And because of the gravity of false accusations, they were very careful to not bring any accusations until it could be proven, because you can absolutely ruin somebody's life. As a matter of fact, they were telling me that not a lot, I'm sorry, that's an exaggeration, that I was told that they knew of women who had just gotten upset at a boyfriend or a divorced husband, and they had the children accuse them, or they accused the man. So this is a very difficult situation to be able to prove. So that's what I got from the police. Now, I asked grandmotherly women the age of my grandmother, and it was not my grandmother. I didn't ask my grandmother this. I'm sure I did, but this was not from my grandmother, but it was from somebody at that age when I was younger, And what she said rung very true to me, that those my age and older have seen the transformation of our culture, where we talk about things that would have never been spoken about in the past. There was things you just didn't say out loud. The I Love Lucy show couldn't even say the word pregnant. And so there was things of a sensitive nature, things that were considered shameful, you just didn't speak about. Your parents would let go. No, we don't talk about those things out loud. I remember I was either in the 7th or 8th grade where an adult or somebody on television or something, I remember the very first time the word homosexuality was spoken in public. Before that, nobody talked to. I mean, you might have jokes about it where a guy would dress up like a girl, or and they would use euphemisms. They wouldn't talk about it out loud. That just wasn't discussed. And so that's one of the reasons, that I was told that nobody, if a child were to come to you, you would just go, oh, we don't discuss those things. As a matter of fact, I'm trying to decide whether I should tell you. If you see my eyes going, it's because I'm trying to decide whether I should tell you some of the instances. There was a woman, I think she would now be, I'm sure she would be dead now, because this was many years ago, and she was in her 90s, I think, when I talked to her then. She said that when a plumber came to her apartment, and I think this was before World War II, that she ran in, and she was a little tiny girl. She ran in to watch the plumber, and her mother stepped outside to do something in the garden, and he molested her. And she went to her mom to say something, and her mother said, oh, We don't talk like things. We don't talk about things like that. Shh, be quiet. We don't talk about. Before she was even able to tell her mother what happened, she was hushed up. And so that was that generation. This is very new. In my lifetime, we've come from being able to not discuss things to the Me Too movement, where everybody was telling everybody. It just wasn't done back then. And now another reason was because science got involved. You see, I remember this very clearly when I was in elementary school. The child psychologist, the time of Spock and stuff like that, these scientists that knew everything would tell us what was a child could handle and what he couldn't. And they said divorce doesn't hurt a child. We do not take into consideration children. When you get a divorce, children are very resilient and they're better off if you get a divorce. That's what science said. I'm not saying that that's not true in some cases, but it did give the impression to a lot of people that might have fought and tried to stay together that they thought, oh, it might be better for the kids if we got a divorce. And they would get a divorce. And indeed, it's not better for a child in most cases. So at the same time, we were told children survived sexual abuse. And not just sexual abuse, but abuse. That kids got over it. They were resilient. They're little. They'll grow up and they'll understand. They'll forgive you. And children are very good about that. That is actually true. Your children will forgive you. It's just going to ruin their lives. It will destroy them. But they'll forgive you because children are like that. Children are made. They're designed to be forgiving to their parents. Another thing is, the Catholic Church and many other groups covered sexual abuse up, or any abuse, because it would ruin their reputation and bring down the group. So, and a lot of people will say they needed the money. It's about money. Well, I'm sure when the Lord said, you can trace every evil back to money, money is the root of all evil, that is probably true. But I don't think most people, most bishops or priests or pastors or parents, I don't think they think, oh, this is about money. We can't get the money. We won't be able. No, they think about the reputation. And they don't think that they can survive the whole entire breakdown of their system, which will, in fact, be based on you can't get money, your group is going to go. And so they would protect the group over the children. Okay. So one of the most interesting things I heard, and again, I am not telling you because I'm trying to excuse any of this. I was just interested in why. And the only reason I'm telling you this is just because you may want to know why. I mean, I think that men who sexually abuse children need to be in jail for the rest of their lives with no possibility of parole. And I don't think we should put them in a cushy jail. I think they need to be put away to suffer for the rest of their lives. Because I'm a Catholic, I will not say that I'm for the death penalty. But before Pope Francis came around, I would say I was for the death penalty for these people. And I know you just don't know what to do because you say, okay, well, they say, well, they were abused. A lot of the abusers themselves were abused. So they're so messed up. They need our compassion as opposed to society's hatred. But it has to stop. It has to stop. And if a grown man is sexually abusing small children, and I'm not talking about a 19-year-old who who was convicted of statutory rape against a 17-year-old. I'm talking about a man in his 20s or above that are sexually molesting small children, 11 years old or 12-year-old. I mean, you know what I mean? Just young girls or boys for that matter. That is a very deviant and demonic thing that they need an exorcism. And if an exorcism doesn't work, I mean, and even if they were, I think they should go to, if they admit that they did it, because you don't want to convict somebody who didn't have, who was innocent. That would be as big a tragedy. But if he admits that he did it, he needs to be put away for the rest of his life without even the possibility of parole. And you need to exercise, send an exorcist in there. But that shouldn't get him out. He should still have to, because there's just no way this should be in any way allowed to happen to another child. So the entire reason I'm saying is because of this last person I spoke to who really took some time to think about it and came back with an answer that I found very, very interesting. I can't say compelling. I think that it's probably true. As evil as it is, it's true. And I'm so glad that we're past this point. But what she said to me was that women will always save their husband over their children, at least in her day. Because throughout history, the family was preserved by the father. Mothers were simply not independent. It's hard for young people to imagine that today. Before the feminist movement in the 1960s, women did think that way. They were completely dependent. They and their children were utterly dependent upon their husband. And if a lot of fathers didn't want to take on their daughter and her children. And so women were psychologically in a situation where they felt utterly financially and in every way dependent on their husband. And I was there at the 19 second wave feminism. I very clearly remember being a little kid and a coloring book. And back then, they had princess coloring books where women were glamorous. I mean, the things you colored were, pictures of girls in glamorous evening gowns or princess outfits or wedding dresses. And I very distinctly remember I got a brand new one for Christmas and I opened it up. I was, oh, things have changed, because it was a coloring book where there were women, but the women were in career outfits, in stewardesses' uniforms and doctors' lab coats. And I thought, where are the pretty dresses? The brides were gone and in were career women. And from then on, it remained. It never went back. Career, they pushed girls to not think about being a mom, but think about being having a career. And they told you back then, you have a choice. You don't have to be a mom. You have a choice. But the fact is, no, they didn't want you to have it, because by the time I was in college, if you took the choice of being a mom, you were laughed at. Then why are you wasting all this money on education? Go home, kick your feet up, watch soap operas and eat bonbons. That's what they stereotyped women who stayed home as. And so they did not, you were told you were a traitor to your sex if you wanted to stay home and be a mom. So I was there during that whole transition. And women who had husbands that abused their children before the women's movement had a Sophie's Choice-like situation. If they were told by all of the in the 60s, especially in the 60s and 70s, absolutely, they had all those Dr. Spocks coming out and say kids are resilient, they can handle abuse, they can handle, don't worry about them, they're going to be fine. And that's what we were told. And not we, as I wasn't married and I was just a kid, but I remember the adults talking this way. And this woman knew, who had a husband, and I'm sure it wasn't this woman. I'm just saying, in a general sense, this woman was telling us that women of her age, your whole family would be disgraced. Your family would never be able to get into good schools. If your husband, if it came out in public and people were publicly talking shamefully about things that were not discussed, things that were only whispered behind closed doors, it would ruin your family forever. There would never be a situation where you could even defend your husband because nobody would talk about it. It's just you would be quietly shunned and there would be nothing you could do. And this was a real thing. Back in the early 1900s, my grandmother told me a story about what happened to her. She wanted to marry my grandfather, but my grandfather, their family had been shamed because he had like 4 or 5 brothers, and one of them committed suicide. Now, my understanding is that it wasn't an actual suicide, but that he fell in love with a girl and he went out and they had a duel, but he knew he couldn't. He knew that it was a duel he couldn't win, and so it was considered a suicide. And it got around, that the worst part was it got around as that he committed suicide. And my grandmother's mother refused to come to the wedding. Now, that wasn't the only reason, but that was a big reason, that my grandmother was allowing into the family someone whose family had been utterly shamed. That was a disgrace. And it disqualified men or women that came from a family to be a decent family to be married into. They became non-eligible for marriage. Now, again, this was based on the quote science of the day. We got to remember, you can't always trust the science, because the science said that it was best for the science was influenced by eugenics. I mean, that was a big thing in the late 1800s and early 1900s. And so they warned people of passing on feeble genetics. And so it was considered, you didn't marry into a family where there was a suicide. It just wasn't done. Good people didn't do that. And so these women were put into a situation where you didn't discuss things. You just couldn't. These were things that were taboo. And when I say taboo, I'm not talking about things that they shouldn't. It was not allowed to be spoken of in public, or mostly even, when I'm saying public, I mean out loud to a group of maybe even one other person. So everything was said in euphemisms to protect the family. And they also believed, and I want to add this to it, scientists also believed, and I remember this personally from hearing this, that to take a child who had been abused by a family member, to take that person to jail would be worse on the child, because then the child would have to get up in court and talk about it. And that would be more traumatic than what actually happened to them. And so our society was encouraged to never speak about it. Don't bring up charges. It's best for the child. The child is going to get over it. Everything's going to be okay. The people didn't say family members because they felt like that would ruin their family. And then when it was an institution such as the Catholic Church, but I mean, evident, and it's not just the Catholic Church. If you've seen one of my other ones about Seventh Adventist boarding schools, I mean, you know that there was a lot of abuse from the girls that I heard from. So that's the stuff that I heard, and I want to pass that along. But at the same time, I want to end up with none of this is an excuse. None of it. If you are willing to throw your child under the bus when they have been hurt, sexually molested, or abused in any form, you are adding to the horrors of a bunch of people's life. Just take care of your children, protect your children. We don't live in that day and age anymore. And scream it to the top of your lungs. Protect your children. So anyway, I wanted to, I had a reason for doing this, and it's because I think we need to understand what's happened in the past. We need to be aware of history, and I've never heard anyone discussing this. And so we're past that. Thank God in heaven, we're past the day that we can't talk about this. And we can stop it now. That's the good news. We can stop it now. Don't let it happen. Catholic Church, bishops, priests, no excuse anymore. Okay, well, thank you for listening. For those of you who could sit through that, thank you for listening, and God bless you, and be holy.
Seventh-day Adventists are one of a handful of Protestant denominations that believe Christians should rest on the seventh day, like ancient Israel and the Jews do today. They base this belief on the Ten Commandments. In addition, they believe the seventh-day Sabbath is the only day God set aside as a special day of worship. Adventists teach that in AD 321, the Roman Emperor Constantine issued an edict declaring Sunday as the day of Christian worship, and that the Catholic Church caved to the emperor's edict by shifting the sacred day from the seventh to the first day of the week. But did the Catholic Church really change the Sabbath day to Sunday? Is there really more to the story? We begin a new series that will be exploring the answers to those questions. We will start at the beginning, from Genesis to Mount Sinai, to the life of Christ, to the Reformation, through the 17th century Sabbath wars, all the way to the end of the world. We will be telling the epic tale of this holy day. This is the story of the Sabbath.